For Americans living today, the colonial era is a time of myth and legend. Because the days when the Founding Fathers lived are so central to our country's history, we sometimes forget what life was like for ordinary colonists. Today, we might find it hard to believe that, like modern generations, the colonists dealt with premarital sex, pregnancy, and blended families, along with some hardships, short lifespans, dying children, that we might have a hard time understanding. By searching your family's history, you might be able to uncover how many of these startling issues your own ancestors encountered and survived. In today's video, we tell the tales of some weird practices that were normal in colonial America. Stick around as we delve into the past to unfold the forgotten history of colonial America. Courtship practices included bed sharing. Although modern Americans imagine colonial-era sexual morals to be, well, puritanical, in the mid to late 1700s, more than 1 in 3 girls was pregnant when she walked down the aisle. So don't be surprised if the birth or baptismal record of a progenitor that you discover on Ancestry is dated fewer than 9 months after the parent's wedding certificate. One unusual northern colonial tradition may have encouraged this premarital fecundity. Bundling, or bed courting, involved young, unmarried couples testing their compatibility by sharing a bed for the night. More common among lower classes and along the frontier, perhaps due to the shortage of fuel for warmth and light, chastity was supposedly ensured by setting a bundling board, a long, upright plank, between the couple, or by having them sleep in separate compartments of a large bundling sack. Blended families were common. During the colonial era, marriages lasted on average less than 12 years because of high mortality rates. In colonial America, death occurred earlier and often. At 1700, the average age of death for Englishmen in Virginia was 48. 1/3 to 1/2 of all children lost at least one parent before the age of 21. In the South, more than half of children 13 and under had lost at least one parent. As a result, remarriages were frequent in colonial America, a fact you can discover for yourself using databases of marriage records on Ancestry. Marriages during the colonial era, however, were not always legally formalized. For many colonists, the cost of a formal legal marriage was more an aspiration than a reality. In colonial North Carolina, for example, a marriage certificate cost £50, a year's salary for a teacher, or 6 months' salary for a minister. As a result, many people formalized their relationships simply by posting bans, announcements read weekly to the community for several weeks. Parents expected some children to die. While death was not uncommon for marriage-age adults, it was almost expected for children. With most colonial women marrying around the age of 20, they would often have about 7 to 10 children. Many children, however, did not survive until adulthood or even toddlerhood. 1 in 10 infants died before they were a year old, and 4 in 10 children died before the age of 6. For slave children, not surprisingly, the outlook was even grimmer. Up to half of all black children in the 1700s died before their first birthday. But even the wealthiest parents had to endure their children's deaths. First Lady Martha Washington, for example, had 4 children, all of whom she outlived. 2 died before turning 5. 1 died at age 17. The last died of an illness at age 26. Accidents also claimed older children, which not a surprising fact is considering the size of families and the risks of life on a farm. Colonial court records available to historians and genealogists show children drowning in tanning pits or mill ponds, falling into hearth fires, and down barn ladders. Because of this, don't be surprised if the death records available on Ancestry for your extended ancestral family include many children. Jobs were extremely limited. Between birth and death in colonial life, there was also work. During the colonial era, nearly all men fell into one of just 7 occupational categories: family farmer, southern planter, indentured servant, slave, unskilled laborer, artisan, or merchant. Women worked in complementary occupations: domestic service, childcare, gardening, and household production, either for home use or for trade. For whites early in the colonial period, the vast continent promised substantial social mobility. Even an indentured servant, after working practically as a slave for 4 to 7 years, could find a plot to work as a tenant farmer and save enough to buy his own land. As the colonial period progressed and towns grew larger, the number of artisans grew. In 1700, only 4 to 5% of the labor force worked as traders, shopkeepers, or merchants. But by 1770, that fraction had grown to 7%. Do you know what jobs your ancestors held during the colonial era? Currency was not just cash and coin. For all their work, many colonial Americans took payment not in cash, but in leaf. Due to a chronic shortage of official English coin, colonists often bought and sold items with tobacco or other rated commodities, to which colonial authorities assigned a certain value in pounds, shillings, and pence, the official English units of money at the time and used until 1971. Besides pressing tobacco into service to facilitate commerce, each colony also printed its own paper money. Each colony also acted as a currency trader, assigning a value to foreign money, often Spanish dollars, circulating alongside English pounds. Because the value of that paper money and foreign coin depended on each colony's proclamation, it was known as proclamation money. Imported goods were sometimes way expensive. In colonial America, a set of bed sheets cost more than the bed itself. According to one North Carolina probate inventory, a list of an individual's assets at his death, and some of the richest sources of genealogical records available on Ancestry and elsewhere, a set of fine Holland sheets, in 1680, cost 50 shillings. Back then, 20 shillings equal a pound. The bed itself cost only 8 shillings. In addition to Dutch textiles, French silks for dresses and Indian tea were prohibitively expensive because imported goods from anywhere other than England were limited by the crown, even for wealthy families. The surprising disparity reflects the reality of the times. Wood was abundant in 17th century North Carolina, but finely spun and woven fabric was unavailable in the colonies and had to be imported at great expense. The workday started before dawn. The workday in colonial America typically began before dawn and lasted until the sun went down, and throughout the day, families dedicated themselves to tasks essential for their survival. The morning started with a modest breakfast of bread and milk, porridge or cornmeal mush with cider or beer before the work began. This sustenance was much needed. Depending on the time of year, weather, and season, the typical workday could be up to 12 hours long, 6 days a week. Men were expected to provide for their families. While farming was the primary occupation throughout the colonies, there were a variety of other jobs to be filled, particularly as towns started to grow. Men worked as blacksmiths, carpenters, silversmiths, and in other skilled trades and crafts that contributed to the local economy. Women typically worked in the home, managing all aspects of the household and childcare, including meal preparation and basic education of the children. In addition, married women in non-farming families often worked alongside their husbands in shops or trades, and unmarried or widowed women took jobs as seamstresses, midwives, or tavern keepers. Children often assisted their parents in their work, learning valuable skills for their future roles in the community. Dinner was at lunchtime. In the colonial era, the midday meal was called dinner, and it was the biggest, heartiest meal of the day. Those who worked in town in trades and shops could go to a common hall for a meal of stew made from pork or poultry, and seasonal vegetables such as corn and cabbage. The midday break provided a short period of rest from work, allowing families to connect with neighbors and strengthen social bonds. For many colonial settlements, the local economy also relied heavily on indentured and enslaved labor. Indentured servants brought from Europe and enslaved individuals, predominantly of African descent, played essential roles in supporting colonial households. Their contributions, though often overlooked, were integral to the success of farms and trades and the day-to-day functioning of many households. Farm laborers, including enslaved workers, would have their dinner brought to them where they worked in the fields. Bathing was a use of a damp cloth and a bucket of water. In the 17th and 18th centuries, full-body baths were infrequent. They were primarily given to infants, not necessarily for cleanliness, but to toughen them. Every morning, individuals, men, women, and children, cleaned their faces and hands. However, when it came to bathing, the process was quite minimal. People utilized a basin, cloth, and perhaps a sponge to wipe themselves down in places where they could ensure privacy. Baths might have been relatively frequent, but the use of soap was absent. Swimming was another method, although immersions in nearby streams or lakes served more to cool off than to achieve cleanliness. Bathtubs, a luxury affordable only to the well-off, were typically sized just enough for a sponge bath. Anyone could be a dentist. During colonial America, the absence of bona fide dentists led to diverse professionals performing tooth extractions. When faced with a troublesome tooth, individuals sought assistance from barbers, surgeons, apothecaries, and even blacksmiths. Before resorting to such procedures, people relied on natural remedies such as figs, chamomile, alcohol, and opium to alleviate toothaches. The maintenance of oral hygiene was of minimal concern while teeth were still in their sockets. However, the replacement of extracted teeth was a common practice. On occasions, the removed tooth would be reinserted into its socket. More frequently, dentures and implants were utilized as solutions. Replacement teeth were sourced from less fortunate individuals who were willing to part with their healthy teeth, while materials like wood, ivory, and metal were shaped to create dentures. Among the prominent figures of the colonial era, George Washington stood out as an individual who wore dentures. Crafted from a combination of metal, wire, and animal teeth, his dentures were a constant source of discomfort and led to facial distortions. The solution to lice was powdered wig. Powdered wigs served as both a solution to and a source of the lice problem in colonial America. During that time, individuals of the middle and upper classes adopted the practice of wearing powdered wigs. These wigs, crafted from human and animal hair, were favored by both men and women. They were often worn in conjunction with keeping their own natural hair extremely short. Given the prevalent issue of lice infestations, shaving one's head emerged as a tactic to deter these pests from taking hold of hair. However, the powdered wigs themselves weren't immune to infestations. To maintain their cleanliness and presentable appearance, individuals regularly subjected their wigs to treatments or delegated this task to slaves and servants who would dress the wigs. Ideally, wigs required weekly maintenance, although this process was a considerable expense. In some instances, people endured weeks or even months without a proper cleaning. In cases where lice became problematic, boiling the wigs was a method employed to eliminate the infestation. Moreover, these wigs were often infused with fragrances like bergamot, bay leaves, and sassafras, which repelled bugs. Powders and oils were also utilized to mask both the individual's natural scent and the odor of the hair. However, it's worth noting that the pomades used to style these wigs tended to attract insects, leading them to become ensnared in the adhesive substance. One tool to clean ears and teeth. A silver ear picker was unearthed by archaeologists within the confines of the original Jamestown fort in the 1990s. This artifact, originating from the early 17th century, featured a pointed pick on one end and a diminutive scooping tool on the other. These ear picks served multifunctional roles, including being employed as toothpicks, for manicuring fingernails, and for fulfilling various cleanliness-related tasks. The spoon-like aspect of the ear picker potentially functioned in the extraction of earwax, while also proving valuable in harvesting this precious substance. In the absence of beeswax, earwax was administered to the thread to avert its fraying. Lye soap was not used for personal care, but clothing and dishes. While wealthier colonists might have indulged in imported aromatic soaps from Europe, the majority of colonists either crafted their own soap or procured it locally. Lye soap, a product derived from a blend of animal fat, lye, and ash, possessed abrasive qualities and was exclusively employed for scouring clothing, utensils, and various household areas during the colonial era. The creation of lye soap followed an imprecise approach, disregarding precise measurements, and its production process was both time-intensive and odorous. The utilization of lye soap introduced additional challenges to the task of laundry in colonial America. The harsh mixture, coupled with the demands of transporting water, kindling fires, wringing garments, and arranging items for drying, compounded the already strenuous chore. Consequently, only the most heavily soiled attire, undergarments, aprons, and diapers received any semblance of consistent washing. Shaving was something done for men, by men. The earliest European settlers in North America didn't shave, and smooth, hair-free faces became common only during the mid-18th century. Men, on the other hand, visited barbers when they wanted a shave. Carried out with straight razors, shaves were done by skilled barbers. To be a barber was considered a lowly profession, however, in large part due to its racial implications. Many slaves shaved their masters while free non-whites worked as barbers in a society in which white labor was considered too valuable for the task. There's very little evidence to suggest that women shaved any part of their bodies, especially since conventions dictated women show no significant amount of skin. Even hair on a woman's face wasn't shaved, in part because shaving was dangerous, and bloodbaths could only be prevented by experienced hands. Women may have plucked hair or used depilatory creams instead. Several recipes in medical handbooks that circulated in England and the colonies, specifically The Birth of Mankind, 1540, included recipes for depilatories that combined limestone, arsenic, and other substances. Dysentery was common. In the early colonial era of America, a lack of proper sanitation was widespread, both in rural regions and densely populated areas. This led to the rapid spread of diseases. Outhouses and waste containers were often situated near water sources and living spaces, while streets could be lined with animal excrement, rubbish, and various forms of waste. Diseases like dysentery, cholera, and typhoid fever were commonplace, especially during the sweltering summer months. In 1676, an epidemic of the bloody flux struck Boston, claiming the lives of numerous children within the city. During that same year, Nathaniel Bacon Jr., the leader of Bacon's Rebellion, was suddenly taken by the same disease. Outbreaks of waterborne illnesses recurred frequently, affecting both civilians and soldiers. When George Washington and his forces set up camp at Valley Forge in December 1777, nearly two-thirds of his 2,000-strong army fell victim to dysentery, typhoid, and influenza. Military leaders were acutely aware of the hazards of campaigning during the summer months. These disease outbreaks may have even contributed to the success of the colonial forces, as a significant number of British troops in the southern colonies succumbed to various fevers. Body odor was a self-defense mechanism. Attitudes toward personal hygiene in colonial era. America varied, yet several of the nation's founding fathers expressed clear opinions regarding women's cleanliness. A notable example is Thomas Jefferson, who candidly advised his daughter Martha that nothing is as off-putting to our gender as a lack of cleanliness and refinement in yours. During the late 18th century, medical professionals advocated for women to engage in bathing, primarily as a remedy for ailments related to the female reproductive system. While historians acknowledged the prevailing notion that women's natural state might cause them to emit disagreeable odors in order to moderate the excessive ardor of males, the emphasis remained on personal cleanliness as a paramount virtue. Although women might employ their own bodily scents as a form of defense to ensure protection by making themselves as repugnant as conceivable, the resulting malodor was universally regarded as unpleasant among women. The Protestants viewed uncleanliness as sin. Some emphasized the value of bodily oils and other similar substances for maintaining health, while others focused on the importance of cleanliness in preventing diseases and illnesses. The impact of religious beliefs on bathing habits and cleanliness during colonial America further complicated these attitudes. Puritans associated a lack of cleanliness with sin and the devil, which also had societal consequences. Cleanliness was closely tied to moral values, and those who engaged in regular bathing were seen as less likely to participate in sinful activities or wrongdoing. They were also less likely to be impoverished. Water was considered a purifying element that cleansed both the body and the mind from impurities. Maintaining clean bodies, clothing, households, and settlements were all seen as contributing to spiritual well-being. However, the Puritans grappled with the notion that excessive bathing could potentially lead to moral degradation. Public bathing facilities, in particular, were believed to be associated with disease and improper behavior. And with that, we wrap up today's episode. Thank you for joining us once again. We hope you enjoyed this video. Remember to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you will be the first to see our new updates. See you in our next video.